They called her the Ghost Wife. For 5 years, Celine was the woman in the background, wearing old clothes, scrubbing floors, and tolerating the insults of a husband who thought he was a king and in-laws who treated her like a servant. When Ethan served her the divorce papers to marry his mistress, he expected a fight. He expected begging. Instead, Celine just smiled, picked up a pen, and signed. Quietly. Ethan thought he had won. He thought she was powerless. But he didn't check who she was before they met. He didn't know that the silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before a storm that would arrive in a Gulfstream G650 jet and burn his entire world to the ground. This is the story of the ultimate revenge. The dinner party at the Montgomery penthouse on the Upper East Side was, as usual, a theater of cruelty. The air smelled of expensive roasting lamb and the heavy, cloying scent of Chanel No. 5, which Ethan's mother, Patricia, bathed in. Celine Montgomery moved through the room with a tray of crystal flutes, her head down. She wore a simple grey dress, bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, but compared to the silk and velvet worn by the wives of Ethan's business partners, she looked like part of the catering staff. "Ethan, darling," Patricia's voice cut through the chatter, shrill and demanding. She was holding court on the velvet sofa, swirling her wine. "Where is the help? My glass has been empty for 3 minutes." Ethan Montgomery, standing by the window with a scotch in hand, didn't even look at his wife. He was 34, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with the kind of jawline that suggested money and eyes that suggested he'd sell his own soul to keep it. He was a rising star at Sterling Hargrave, one of the biggest investment firms in New York. "Celine," Ethan snapped, snapping his fingers without turning his head. "Mother is thirsty. Wake up." Celine froze. A few guests chuckled uncomfortably. A heavy-set man, Mr. Henderson, the CEO of a logistics company Ethan was trying to woo, leaned in. "Your maid is a bit slow today, Montgomery." Ethan laughed, a cold, dry sound. "That's actually my wife, Henderson. But you're right. Sometimes I can't tell the difference myself. She has zero ambition, no spark." Celine felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a familiar burning sensation. She walked over to Patricia, pouring the vintage Pinot Noir with a steady hand, despite the trembling in her heart. "Careful," Patricia hissed, pulling her dress away, though not a drop had spilled. "God, you are clumsy. I told Ethan he was marrying down. I told him, you don't marry the girl from the library. You marry into a family that can help your career." But he was going through a charitable phase. Celine placed the bottle down on a coaster. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Patricia. Is there anything else you need?" "A daughter-in-law with a spine? A better pedigree?" Patricia sneered, looking Celine up and down. "Look at you. You're 30 years old and you dress like a spinster librarian. You're an embarrassment to the Montgomery name. Ethan is closing a deal with the Kensington Group next week. Do you know what that means? It means billions. And he has to bring you to the gala. It's humiliating." Celine said nothing. She retreated to the kitchen, the laughter of the dining room fading behind the swinging door. She leaned against the cold granite counter, breathing deeply. 5 years. She had loved Ethan. They had met in a coffee shop in Boston. He was charming then, driven, but attentive. She had never told him much about her family. She wanted to be sure he loved her for her, not for what she came from. So she told him she was estranged from her parents, that she lived a simple life. She never expected that simple would become a weapon he used to bludgeon her self-worth. The kitchen door swung open. It wasn't Ethan. It was Jessica Vane. Jessica was everything Celine wasn't. Tall, blonde, wearing a red dress that cost more than Celine's entire wardrobe, and radiating a shark-like confidence. She was the new VP of marketing at Ethan's firm. "Rough crowd out there," Jessica said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. She walked to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. She didn't look at Celine. She looked at her reflection in the oven glass. "I'm used to it," Celine said quietly, turning back to the sink to wash a dish the hired staff had missed. "You shouldn't have to be," Jessica smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Ethan talks about you, you know, at the office." Celine stopped scrubbing. "Does he?" He says you're quaint, domestic. He says he feels bad for you because you wouldn't survive a day in the real world." Jessica stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the room. "He needs a partner, Celine. Someone who understands power. Someone who can stand next to him when he takes over the firm." "He hasn't taken over the firm yet," Celine said, her voice steadying. "The board of directors is notoriously difficult." Jessica laughed. "Oh, honey, you really don't know anything, do you? Ethan has a plan. He's going to be king of New York, and kings don't stay married to peasants." Jessica turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging. Through the gap, Celine saw Jessica walk straight up to Ethan. He placed a hand on the small of her back. Too low, too familiar, too possessive. They shared a look that wasn't professional. It was intimate. Celine looked down at her ring. A modest diamond. Ethan had bought it when he was just an associate. He had promised to upgrade it years ago, but never did. Peasant, she thought. If only they knew. She pulled a burner phone from the bottom of her laundry basket in the utility closet, the only place she had privacy. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. "Hello?" A crisp British voice answered. "This is the office of Arthur Penhaligon." "Arthur," Celine said, her voice changing. The softness evaporated, replaced by a cold steel cadence inherited from generations of iron-willed ancestors. "It's Celine. Tell grandfather I'm coming home, and tell the legal team to prepare the file on Ethan Montgomery. I'm done playing the mouse." The betrayal didn't happen in the dark. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner party. Selena was in the living room, folding Ethan's dry cleaning. The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city below. The elevator dinged, opening directly into the foyer. Ethan walked in. He wasn't alone. Patricia was with him, and so was a man Celine didn't recognize. A stout man with a briefcase who smelled of stale cigars. "Ethan?" Celine asked, dropping a shirt. "You're home early." "Sit down, Celine," Ethan said. He didn't say hello. He walked past her and poured himself a drink, even though it was 11 a.m. Patricia sat on the armchair, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. "Finally," she muttered. "I told you to do this 2 years ago." The stout man placed the briefcase on the coffee table. "Mrs. Montgomery, my name is Greg Folsom. I am Ethan's attorney." Celine looked from the lawyer to her husband. "What is this?" "It's over, Celine," Ethan said, turning around. He looked annoyed, as if this were a boring meeting he wanted to wrap up. "I'm filing for divorce." Celine stood still. She expected to feel shattered. She expected tears. But after the years of neglect, the insults, and seeing him with Jessica, all she felt was a strange, numb relief. "On what grounds?" she asked. "Irreconcilable differences," Folsom said, opening a folder. "And frankly, incompatibility of lifestyle. Ethan is a public figure now. His profile is rising. He needs a spouse who matches that trajectory." "Matches his trajectory," Celine repeated. "You mean Jessica?" Ethan paused, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Leave Jessica out of this. This is about us. We don't work. You're stagnant, Celine. You have no ambition. I'm drowning carrying the dead weight of this marriage." Patricia chimed in. "Oh, stop being so polite, Ethan. Celine, look, we're being generous. Since there was no prenup, a mistake I begged him not to make, Ethan is offering you a settlement." Folsom slid a paper across the marble table. "A lump sum of $50,000. And you keep the car, the 2018 Honda." Celine looked at the paper. Ethan was worth millions. His bonus last year alone was $3 million. $50,000 was an insult. It was less than what he spent on his golf club membership. $50,000? Celine asked quietly. It's more than you deserve, Ethan snapped. You brought nothing into this marriage. You have no job, no family money, no connections. You've been living off me for 5 years. Take it, sign the papers, and go back to wherever people like you come from. If you fight this, I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure you end up on the street. He means it, Patricia added gleefully. We have the best lawyers in the city. You can't afford a parking ticket, let alone a defense. Celine looked at Ethan, really looked at him. She saw the fear behind his arrogance. He wanted this done fast so he could marry Jessica and secure his power couple image before the big promotion at the firm. She reached into her pocket, not for a tissue, but for a pen. Where do I sign? She asked. The room went silent. Ethan blinked. What? I said, where do I sign? Celine's voice was even, devoid of emotion. Folsom, the lawyer, looked surprised. He pointed to the bottom of the page, right here and here. This waives your right to alimony and any future claims on Mr. Montgomery's assets. Celine bent down. She didn't hesitate. Her hand moved fluidly, signing Celine Montgomery for the last time. She straightened up and looked Ethan in the eye. I want one thing. I knew it, Patricia scoffed. Here comes the begging. I want the court date to be public, Celine said. I want it finalized before a judge. I don't want a private arbitration. I want it on the record that I walked away with exactly what you offered. Ethan laughed, relieved. You want to be humiliated in public? Fine. Done. The court hearing is in 2 weeks. It's a formality. Good, Celine said. I'll be moved out by tonight. Tonight? Ethan frowned. You don't have anywhere to go. Don't worry about me, Ethan, Celine said, walking towards the bedroom to pack her single suitcase. She paused at the hallway entrance. Just worry about your trajectory. As she packed her bag, she heard them popping champagne in the living room. To Jessica, Patricia toasted, and to getting rid of the mouse. Celine zipped up her bag. It contained 2 dresses, her toiletries, and a small velvet box she had kept hidden in a vent for 5 years. Inside the box was a signet ring bearing a crest that dated back to the 1700s, a crest that hung in the lobby of the very building Ethan worked in. She walked out of the penthouse, handed her key to the doorman, and stepped onto the curb. A black town car was waiting. Not an Uber. A Lincoln Continental with tinted windows. The driver, a man with grey hair and military posture, stepped out and opened the door. Good evening, Miss Sterling, the driver said. Hello, Alfred, Celine said, sliding into the leather seat. Take me to the airport. The jet is waiting. Destinaten, ma'am? Zurich, she said. I have a board meeting to prepare for. 2 weeks passed. For Ethan, they were the best 2 weeks of his life. With Celine gone, he immediately moved Jessica into the penthouse. They were the golden couple of the New York financial scene. They attended galas, dined at Le Bernardin, and were featured in the Page 6 social columns. Ethan Montgomery, rising star of Sterling Hargrave, seen with the stunning Jessica Vane, the caption read. Ethan felt invincible. He was closing the deal with the Kensington Group. His boss, the elusive CEO of Sterling Hargrave, who managed operations from Europe, had sent a memo praising the quarterly numbers. You see? Ethan told Patricia over brunch at the Plaza Hotel. Celine was holding me back. She was bad energy. Since she left, everything has been perfect. I always knew it, Patricia said, buttering a scone. Did she cash the check? I don't know, Ethan shrugged. Probably. She needs it to survive. But there were strange ripples in the water that Ethan was too arrogant to notice. 3 days before the court hearing, strange things started happening at the office. Several senior partners were fired abruptly. A forensic accounting team from London swept through the building, auditing specific accounts, specifically the ones Ethan managed. Ethan dismissed it. Standard procedure, he told Jessica. They're just tightening up before the fiscal year ends. Then the rumors started. Whispers that the majority shareholder of the company, the mysterious Sterling Family Trust, was sending a representative to New York to restructure the American division. "Who is the representative?" Jessica asked him, looking worried as she scrolled through her iPad in bed. "No one knows," Ethan said, checking his reflection in the mirror. "Probably some old guy in a suit. I'll charm him, just like I charm everyone. Don't worry, babe. By Friday, I'll be divorced, and by Monday, I'll be promoted to senior partner." The day of the hearing arrived. It was a rainy, grey morning in Manhattan. The courthouse was crowded. Ethan arrived with an entourage. Patricia was there, wearing a hat that looked like a dead bird. Jessica was there, looking sleek in a white power suit, holding Ethan's hand. Greg Folsom, the lawyer, walked ahead, clearing the path. They looked like royalty. They acted like they owned the place. "Is she here?" Ethan asked, scanning the hallway. He expected to see Celine sitting on a bench, looking pathetic. "Not yet." Folsom checked his watch. "Court starts in 10 minutes. If she doesn't show, we win by default." "She's probably too ashamed," Patricia laughed, "or she couldn't afford the subway fare." They entered the courtroom. The judge, the Honorable Justice Holloway, looked bored. He was shuffling papers. Ethan took his seat at the plaintiff's table. He checked his phone. A text from his broker. "Stock is moving weirdly this morning. Massive buy orders coming in from Europe." Ethan ignored it. He looked at the empty defense table. "Your Honor," Folsom stood up. "The respondent, Miss Celine Montgomery, is not present. We move for an immediate default judgment." Judge Holloway looked up over his glasses. "It is 8:59, Counselor. Court begins at 9 o'clock. We will wait." The seconds ticked by. 8:59 and 30 seconds. 8:59 and 45 seconds. "She's not coming," Jessica whispered, squeezing Ethan's hand. "We won." Then a sound. It wasn't the opening of the heavy wooden doors. It was a vibration. A low rumble that seemed to come from outside, penetrating the thick stone walls of the courthouse. It grew louder, shaking the water in the pitcher on the judge's desk. "What is that?" Patricia asked, looking around. Outside, on the street below, traffic had stopped. Pedestrians were looking up. Descending through the grey clouds, cutting through the rain like a silver arrow, was a helicopter. But not a news chopper or a police bird. It was a Sikorsky S-76, painted in midnight blue with a gold crest on the side. It bypassed the heliports. It hovered low, creating a spectacle, before landing on the private rooftop pad of the building adjacent to the courthouse, a building owned by the Sterling Trust. Back in the courtroom, the doors didn't just open. They were pushed open by two large men in suits with earpieces. The room went silent. Then a woman entered. Ethan squinted. For a second, he didn't recognize her. She was wearing a tailored black suit that fit her like a second skin. Givenchy, current season. She wore sunglasses, which she slowly removed. Her hair, usually tied in a messy bun, was blown out in glossy, cascading waves. On her wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch, worth more than Ethan's penthouse, and behind her trailed 4 lawyers, not strip mall lawyers. These were the senior partners of Kirkland & Ellis, the most aggressive firm in the world. Ethan's mouth fell open. Patricia dropped her purse. Celine walked down the center aisle. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Ethan. Her eyes were cold, hard diamonds. She reached the defense table, and one of the high-powered lawyers pulled out her chair. "Sorry I'm late, Your Honor," Celine said. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It commanded the room. "My pilot had some trouble with the headwinds coming in from Monaco." Judge Holloway's eyes widened. He recognized the lead lawyer beside her. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't know you took divorce cases." The lawyer, a man who charged $2,000 an hour, smiled thinly. "I don't, Your Honor, except when the client is Celine Sterling, the sole heiress to the Sterling copper and industrial empire. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "Sterling?" he whispered. "Yes," Jessica gasped, clutching his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Ethan. Sterling Hargrave, the company you work for. She owns it." Celine turned her head slowly, locking eyes with her husband. She offered him a small, terrifying smile. "Hello, Ethan," she said. "I believe we have some business to discuss." The silence in courtroom 4. It was so absolute it felt heavy, pressing down on Ethan's chest like a physical weight. "Sterling?" Ethan repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at the woman he had treated like a piece of furniture for 5 years, the woman he had scolded for buying brand-name detergent because it was too expensive. Selina didn't blink. She sat with the poise of a queen, her hands folded on the mahogany table. "Mr. Folsom," Judge Holloway said, clearing his throat nervously. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Ethan's sweat-drenched lawyer. "Are you ready to proceed with your opening statement?" Folsom stood up, his legs shaking. The arrogance from the morning was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a small animal spotting a hawk. Your Honor, my client," Mr. Blackwood interrupted, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a razor, "would like to skip the theatrics. Mr. Montgomery filed for divorce on the grounds of incompatibility of lifestyle. He claims my client, Celine, is a financial burden, that she brought, and I quote, nothing to the marriage." Blackwood picked up a document from his stack. It wasn't a piece of paper. It was a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "We are here to agree," Blackwood smiled. "Mr. Montgomery is correct. Their lifestyles are indeed incompatible. He is a mid-level manager with a leased penthouse and a net worth of approximately $3 million, largely tied up in unvested stock options. My client, Selina Sterling, is the primary shareholder of the Sterling Global Trust, with a personal valuation of $4.2 billion. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Patricia, sitting in the front row, made a sound like a dying kettle. She clutched her chest, staring at Celine's Givenchy suit as if it were an alien artifact. "Billion?" she wheezed. "With a B?" "Therefore," Blackwood continued, "we accept the divorce, immediately. However, we have a counterclaim regarding the division of assets." Ethan found his voice. He stood up, his face red with a mix of humiliation and lingering anger. "This is a lie. She's a librarian. She worked at the public library in Boston." Celine finally spoke. She didn't stand up. She didn't need to. She leaned into the microphone. "I worked at the library because I loved books, Ethan," she said, her tone conversational, almost bored. "And because I wanted to know what it felt like to live a life without people asking me for money. I wanted to see if I could find someone who loved me, not the checkbook." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I thought I found that with you," she continued, her eyes hardening. "But then I realized you didn't love me. You loved having someone to look down on. You needed a small wife to make you feel like a big man." "That's not true," Ethan stammered. "Isn't it?" Celine opened a folder in front of her. "Let's talk about assets. You offered me $50,000 and the Honda. Generous. But I think we should talk about the penthouse." "The penthouse is in my name," Ethan shouted. "I bought it last year." "You put a down payment on it," Celine corrected, "and you secured a mortgage." "Through Sterling Hargrave Employees Credit Union, a bank owned by my family. Mr. Blackwood?" Blackwood nodded. "As of this morning, the Sterling Trust has exercised its right to recall all high-risk loans held by employees under investigation for misconduct. Your mortgage has been called in, Mr. Montgomery. You have 24 hours to pay the remaining balance of $4.2 million, or the property will be foreclosed." Ethan gripped the table. "What? You can't do that." "We already did," Blackwood said. "And the car, the Lincoln you arrived in, leased through the company. That lease has been terminated effective immediately. I believe the tow truck is outside right now." Patricia let out a sob. "But where will we live?" Celine looked at her mother-in-law. For the first time, there was no fear in Celine's eyes, only pity. "I suggest you look for a hotel, Patricia. One that accepts credit cards, assuming Ethan hasn't maxed his out on jewelry for Jessica." Jessica, who had been shrinking into her seat, suddenly stood up. "I didn't know," she cried out, looking at the judge, then at Celine. "Selina, listen to me. I had no idea who you were. Ethan told me you were dragging him down. He lied to me, too." Ethan whipped around. "Jessica, shut up! No, you shut up!" Jessica yelled, panic taking over. She realized her career at Sterling Hargrave was likely over if she didn't distance herself. "He manipulated me. Celine, please, I'm a victim here too." Celine laughed. It was a cold, musical sound. "Sit down, Jessica. You're not a victim. You're just a bad investment." Celine turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I am waiving all rights to Mr. Montgomery's 401k, his savings and his personal effects. He can keep his money. He's going to need every penny for the legal fees he's about to incur." "Legal fees?" Ethan asked, sweat dripping down his nose. "For the divorce?" "No," Celine said, closing her file. "For the embezzlement trial." The room went dead silent. "What?" Ethan whispered. "Did you think I wasn't watching?" Celine asked softly. "You're a senior director at my firm, Ethan. For 3 years you've been funneling client fees into offshore accounts in the Caymans. You thought you were clever hiding it under consulting expenses. But you forgot one thing. The auditor who signs off on those accounts, he reports to the board, and the board reports to me." Mr. Blackwood handed a thick stack of papers to the bailiff. "Evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and insider trading. We are submitting this to the district attorney as we speak." Judge Holloway looked at the documents, his eyebrows shooting up to his hairline. He looked at Ethan with utter disdain. "Mr. Montgomery," the judge said, "I am granting the divorce. But I suggest you don't leave town. The bailiff will escort you out." Ethan stood there, his legs turning to jelly. He looked at his mother, who was weeping into her hands. He looked at Jessica, who was already texting someone, probably a recruiter. Then he looked at Celine. "Celine," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, we can talk about this. I'm your husband." Celine stood up. She put on her sunglasses. "No, Ethan," she said, turning to walk away. "You were my husband. Now? You're just a line item I'm writing off." She swept out of the courtroom, her lawyers flanking her like a phalanx of sharks. Ethan collapsed into his chair, the sound of the gavel banging, sealing his fate. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Ethan didn't go to jail immediately. The wheels of justice grind slow, but the wheels of corporate vengeance grind fast. He stumbled out of the courthouse into the rain. His town car was gone. Alfred, the driver, was gone. Ethan stood on the curb, getting soaked, while Patricia screamed at him under the awning. "You idiot!" she shrieked, hitting him with her handbag. "You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was trash. She's a sterling. Do you know what that means? We could have been royalty. I could have been summering in the Hamptons." "Mother, stop!" Ethan snapped, pushing her away. "I need to think. I need to get to the office. I can fix this. I just need to get to the servers and delete the files before the forensic team locks me out." "Jessica," Ethan turned to his mistress, "you have the codes to the backup server, right?" Jessica looked at him with pure disgust. She hailed a taxi. "Don't talk to me, Ethan. I'm going to HR to file a harassment complaint. I'm going to tell them you forced me into this relationship. It's my only chance." You witch!" Ethan yelled as she slammed the taxi door. Ethan was left alone with his mother. He ordered an UberX, because his credit card declined for the black. They rode in silence to the Sterling Hargrave Tower in Midtown. The building was a monolith of glass and steel, reaching into the clouds. Ethan had walked into this building every day for 7 years, feeling like a god. Today, it looked like a tombstone. He rushed through the lobby, ignoring the security guard. He pressed his badge against the turnstile. Beep, beep. Access denied. Damn it, Ethan muttered. He tried again. Access denied. Mr. Montgomery, a deep voice boomed. Ethan turned. It was the head of security, a man named O'Malley, who Ethan had never bothered to learn the name of before. Flanking him were 2 NYPD officers. There must be a mistake, Ethan said, forcing a smile. My badge is demagnetized. No mistake, O'Malley said, stepping closer. Your clearance is revoked, but you are expected upstairs. The board is in emergency session. They want to see you. The board? Ethan swallowed. Okay, good, I can explain. Take me up. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was the longest of his life. The silence was suffocating. When the doors opened, the receptionist didn't smile. She didn't even look up. Ethan walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of the company's founders. He stopped at the last portrait, Archibald Sterling, 1890 to 1965. He looked eerily like Celine around the eyes. How had he never seen it? The nose, the set of the jaw, it had been staring him in the face every day. He pushed open the double doors to the boardroom. Usually the boardroom was empty, save for the CEO, Mr. Vance, and maybe the COO. Today the long table was full. 12 people sat in silence, the board of directors, men and women who controlled the global economy, and at the head of the table, in the seat usually reserved for the absent owner, sat Selene. She had changed out of her courtroom suit. She was now wearing a white silk blouse and dark trousers. She looked fresh, calm, and terrifyingly powerful. Come in, Ethan, she said. Ethan walked to the foot of the table. He felt like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Mr. Vance, Ethan looked at the CEO, a grey-haired man he had spent years sucking up to. Sir, surely you don't believe these allegations. Selene, my ex-wife, she is vindictive. This is a domestic dispute spilling into the workplace. Mr. Vance didn't look at Ethan. He looked at Selene. Miss Sterling, shall I proceed? Please, Selene said, pouring herself a glass of water. Ethan, Vance said, his voice cold. We have completed the audit. The domestic dispute is irrelevant. What is relevant is the $3 million missing from the Kensington account. What is relevant is the fact that you used insider information to short-sell our own stock prior to the last earnings call. That can be explained, Ethan stammered. I was hedging. It was a strategy. It was a crime, Selene said. Her voice cut through the air, and it was a betrayal of my family's legacy. She stood up and walked slowly down the length of the table. The board members watched her with reverence. You know, Ethan, she said, stopping right in front of him, I gave you so many chances. When we were married, I asked you to be kind. You refused. I asked you to be honest. You refused. I asked you to respect me. You laughed. She leaned in close. He could smell her perfume, a scent he realized he had never bought her. It was subtle, expensive, and old world. You wanted to be a big man in this company, she whispered. You wanted to sit at this table. Well, here you are. The entire board is watching. Are you happy? Selene, please, Ethan whispered, tears pricking his eyes. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Don't destroy me. If you fire me for cause, I'll never work in finance again. Fire you? Selene smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing he had ever seen. Ethan, I'm not just firing you. I'm erasing you. She signaled to O'Malley. We have pressed charges, Selene announced to the room. But more importantly, I have contacted every major firm in New York, London, and Tokyo. I have personally informed them of your indiscretions. You won't just be unemployed, Ethan. You will be unemployable. You won't be able to get a job as a bank teller, let alone a trader. You can't do that, Ethan cried. It's slander. It's not slander if it's true, Selene said simply. Get him out of here. O'Malley grabbed Ethan's arm. Wait, Ethan struggled. Selene, I loved you. In the beginning, I loved you. Selene didn't turn around. She walked back to the head of the table and sat down, "And that," she said to the board, ignoring his screams as he was dragged out, "concludes the matter of the rogue employee. Now, shall we move on to the acquisition of the Kensington Group?" As the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off Ethan's pleas, Celine allowed herself one deep breath. The mouse was dead. The lioness had finally eaten. But outside the glass walls of the office, the real world was waiting. Ethan was destroyed. But a man with nothing to lose is a dangerous thing. And Patricia was still out there, humiliated and penniless, plotting her own chaotic form of revenge. The war was won, but the fallout was just beginning. The fall was not a graceful descent. It was a crash. 3 hours after being escorted out of the Sterling Hargrave building, Ethan sat on a plastic chair in the waiting room of the Midtown North Precinct. He had been booked, fingerprinted, and released on his own recognizance only because the judge deemed him a low flight risk. Mostly because his passport had been confiscated and his bank accounts were frozen. He walked out of the station into the blinding flash of cameras. "Ethan! Ethan!" the paparazzi screamed. "Did you know your wife was a billionaire? Is it true you stole $3 million? What do you have to say to Jessica Vane's statement?" Ethan shielded his eyes. "What statement?" he muttered to no one. He found a discarded newspaper on a bench in Central Park, where he sat to hide from the cameras. On page 3 of the New York Post, the headline screamed, "Wall Street Wolf turns into sheep. Mistress claims she was manipulated." The article was brutal. Jessica Vane had given an exclusive interview. She claimed Ethan had lied to her about his marriage, told her Celine was abusive, and coerced her into signing off on the fraudulent accounts. It was a lie, of course. Jessica had been the one to suggest the offshore accounts, but she had gotten out in front of the narrative. She was painting herself as the victim to save her own career. Ethan crumbled the paper. He had no phone. His company phone was seized. His personal iPhone had been in his jacket pocket, which he left in his office during the audit. He had $40 in his wallet. He took the subway to Queens. It was the longest ride of his life. He went to the only place he could think of, his mother's sister, Aunt Linda, who lived in a small, cramped apartment in Astoria. Patricia had burned that bridge years ago, calling Linda a low-class failure, but Ethan had nowhere else to go. When he arrived, he found Patricia already there. She was sitting at Linda's kitchen table, sobbing into a mug of cheap, instant coffee. "Look at you," Patricia spat as Ethan walked in. She was wearing her expensive coat, but her makeup was running, making her look like a melted clown. "You ruined everything." "I ruined everything?" Ethan laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "You were the one who told me she wasn't good enough. You were the one who told me to cheat. You said, 'Get a woman with ambition.'" "I didn't tell you to embezzle money," Patricia shrieked. "I didn't tell you to marry a secret billionaire and treat her like a slave. If you had just been nice to her, we would be on a yacht right now. I could have been shopping in Paris." Aunt Linda, a woman with rough hands and a kind face, slammed a pot down on the stove. "Both of you, shut up." The room went silent. "You're staying here tonight," Linda said, pointing a wooden spoon at them. "But tomorrow you figure it out. I work 2 jobs. I don't have time for your high society drama. And Ethan, the police called here. They're looking for more documents. You're in deep trouble, kid." That night, Ethan lay on a lumpy sofa, staring at the water-stained ceiling. He thought about the penthouse. He thought about the way the sheets used to feel. Egyptian cotton. He thought about Selena. He remembered a night 2 years ago. He had come home late, drunk, and shouted at her because dinner was cold. She hadn't yelled back. She had just warmed it up, set the table, and asked him how his day was. Why didn't she tell me, he thought, anger flaring up again. It's entrapment, she tricked me. He refused to accept responsibility. In his mind, he was the victim of a cruel prank. The next few months were a blur of misery. The foreclosure on the penthouse went through in record time. All of Ethan's furniture, his designer suits, his watch collection. It was all auctioned off to pay back the stolen funds. Because of the high-profile nature of the case, no one would hire him. He applied to boutique firms. Rejected. He applied to banks. Rejected. He applied to be a manager at a car dealership. The owner laughed in his face and asked for a selfie to post on Instagram with the caption, "Look who asked for a job today." Ethan Montgomery, the man who wanted to be king of New York, ended up working the night shift at a warehouse in New Jersey, packing boxes for an online retailer. He blistered his hands, his back ached, and every time he saw a private jet fly overhead, he felt a stone in his gut. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. 6 months after the trial, Ethan received a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a handwritten note on heavy cream-colored stationery. "Ethan, I found this in your old desk. I thought you should have it. It's the only thing of yours I didn't sell. Celine." Inside the envelope was a photograph of them from their honeymoon in Cape Cod. They looked happy. On the back, in Celine's handwriting from 5 years ago, it said, "To my love, we will build the world together. Turn more." Ethan stared at the photo. He sat on the curb outside the warehouse, covered in dust, and for the first time in his life he didn't feel anger. He felt an empty, hollow ache. He realized that the money hadn't been the test, the poverty hadn't been the test. She was the test, and he had failed. 12 months later, New York City had forgotten the name Ethan Montgomery. The city was a machine that chewed up failures and spat them out, resetting its memory for the next scandal. But for Ethan, the year had been a slow, grinding eternity. The Sterling Gala was not just an event, it was a coronation. Held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it was the single most exclusive ticket of the decade. The massive stone steps leading up to the museum were draped in a river of red carpet, flanked by velvet ropes and a phalanx of security guards who stood like statues carved from granite. The air was electric, vibrating with the chaotic energy of 1,000 camera shutters, clicking in unison. The flashbulbs popped like lightning storms, illuminating the faces of tech moguls, European royalty, and Hollywood icons as they ascended the stairs toward the warm, golden glow of the Great Hall. Outside the barricades, held back by the police and the velvet ropes, a crushing mob of onlookers stretched for blocks. They were there to catch a glimpse of the gods of Manhattan. And among them, shivering in a windbreaker that was 2 sizes too big and made of cheap, noisy nylon, was Ethan. He looked 20 years older than the man who had once smirked in the glossy pages of Fortune magazine. His hair, once styled with $50 clay, was thinning and unkempt. His face was gaunt, the skin grey and drawn tight over his cheekbones, the result of a diet consisting mostly of ramen and stress. The criminal trial had been a public flaying. He had avoided prison time by the skin of his teeth, trading it for 5 years of probation and a restitution plan that garnished nearly every dollar he made. He stood on his tiptoes, his breath pluming in the freezing November air. He didn't know exactly why he had come. It was a form of self-flagellation, perhaps, or maybe a delusion. A tiny, twisted part of his mind whispered that if he could just see her, if he could just lock eyes with her, the spell would break. He convinced himself that she was still the quiet girl from the library, that this titan of industry persona was a mask she would drop if she saw his suffering. "Move back!" a police officer barked, shoving a barrier into Ethan's ribs. Ethan didn't fight back. He just adjusted his collar, trying to hide the stain on his shirt. Then a hush fell over the crowd. It started at the curb and rippled backward, silencing the shouts of the paparazzi. A caravan of 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb, flanking a custom Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car was a monolith of luxury, its paint seemingly absorbing the streetlights. A driver in white gloves stepped out and opened the rear door. First, a pair of heels touched the pavement. Then Celine Sterling emerged. The crowd gasped. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. She was transformed. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frames before cascading into a dramatic train, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stardust. Around her neck sat the sterling star, a diamond necklace that hadn't been removed from the family vault in 40 years. But the jewelry was secondary. It was her posture that stopped Ethan's heart. Her head was high, her shoulders back. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace. She wasn't the ghost wife who tried to blend into the wallpaper. She was the matriarch. She was the woman who signed the checks that kept the city running. She paused at the base of the stairs, turning to the cameras. She didn't smile nervously. She owned the attention. Ethan felt a physical pain in his chest, sharp and agonizing. He remembered how he used to tell her not to slouch. He remembered telling her she looked frumpy in evening wear. He realized now, with a nausea that roiled in his gut, that she had never been frumpy. She had been hiding her light so it wouldn't blind him. "Mummy!" a bright voice chirped, cutting through the silence. Ethan blinked, startled. From the same car, a tall man stepped out. He was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with suits or money. He had kind eyes and a strong, reassuring jawline. This was Julian, the pediatric surgeon the tabloids had spotted Celine with 6 months ago. Julian reached back into the car and lifted a little girl, perhaps 3 years old, into his arms. The child was dressed in a miniature version of Celine's blue velvet. She wasn't Celine's biological daughter. The timeline didn't fit. But the way the girl reached for Celine, and the way Celine's face softened into pure, unadulterated love, told a different story. It was a family, a real one. Julian placed a hand on the small of Celine's back. Gentle, protective, not possessive. Selene laughed at something he whispered, a sound that floated down to the street. It was a free laugh, a happy laugh. Ethan had never heard her laugh like that. Panic seized him. The reality of his exclusion crashed down on him. She was ascending to Olympus, and he was stuck in the mud. He couldn't let her disappear into the light without acknowledging him. He needed her to know he existed. "Celine!" The scream tore from his throat, ragged and desperate. It was loud enough to turn heads in the crowd. "Celine, look at me!" He pushed against the barricade, his eyes wide and frantic. "It's me! It's Ethan!" The security guards tensed, ready to intercept. But Celine stopped. She was halfway up the stairs. She paused, her hand resting on the velvet rope. Slowly, deliberately, she turned around. From her vantage point, high above the street, she looked down at the sea of darkness. She scanned the faces of the screaming fans, the hungry photographers, and the curious tourists. Then her gaze locked onto him. Time seemed to suspend. The flashbulbs blurred into a haze. It was just the two of them, separated by 50 feet of red carpet and an ocean of choices. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a half step forward, raising a trembling hand. "See me," he pleaded silently. "See what you did to me. See how much I've paid. Hate me if you want, but don't look through me." He wanted her to be angry. Anger would mean he still mattered. Anger would mean there was still a connection, however toxic. But Celine didn't look angry. She looked at his cheap, ill-fitting jacket. She looked at his desperate, sunken eyes. She looked at the man who had once held her life in his hands and treated it like a plaything. Her expression remained perfectly calm. There was no spark of vengeance, no smirk of triumph. There was only a profound, devastating indifference. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway or a piece of litter on the sidewalk, acknowledged but irrelevant. She had already mourned him. She had already buried the memory of him. To her, the man shivering on the sidewalk wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a footnote in a chapter she had finished writing. Beside her, Julian leaned in, his expression concerned as he followed her gaze to the disheveled man screaming at the bottom of the stairs. "Is everything okay, darling?" Julian asked, his voice low. "Do you know him?" Celine looked at Ethan for 1 second longer, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a physical weight on Ethan's shoulders. Then, a small, polite smile touched her lips. She turned to Julian, her eyes returning to the warmth of her new life. "No," she said, her voice clear enough to carry on the wind. "Just a ghost. Let's go inside." She turned her back. The movement was final. She took Julian's arm, and together they ascended the final steps. The heavy glass doors of the museum swung open, spilling golden light onto the red carpet, swallowing them into a world of music, warmth, and power. Then the doors closed. The click of the latch echoed in Ethan's mind like a gunshot. The light was gone. He was back in the cold. "All right, show's over. Keep moving," the police officer shouted, shoving the crowd along. Ethan stood there for a long moment. The image of her blue dress burned into his retinas. The paparazzi lowered their cameras, chimping through their shots, already bored. They had the photo of the Queen. They didn't care about the beggar. Ethan turned away from the museum. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean of the rage that had sustained him for the last year. He realized then the true magnitude of his tragedy. It wasn't that he had lost the money. It wasn't that he had lost the penthouse. It was that he had held a diamond in his hand, mistook it for glass, and thrown it away to chase sequins. As he began the long trudge toward the subway station, he had a shift at the warehouse starting in an hour. A deep rumble shook the pavement beneath his worn-out sneakers. He stopped and looked up, rising from the Manhattan skyline, banking sharply over Central Park towards the Atlantic Ocean, was a Gulfstream G650. Its navigation lights blinked rhythmically against the dark clouds. On the tail, illuminated by a spotlight, was the gold sterling crest. It wasn't carrying Selene. She was inside the museum. It was likely carrying her parents, or perhaps just flying a victory lap, a symbol of the empire that continued to soar while he remained grounded. Ethan watched the jet climb higher and higher, the engines roaring with a power he would never touch again. He watched until the lights were just another star in the cold night sky, indistinguishable from the millions of others. He turned up his collar against the biting wind, lowered his head, and merged into the shadows of the city. The Queen had ascended. The jester was forgotten. And in the high-stakes game of love and power, the house always wins. Ethan Montgomery spent the rest of his life chasing the shadow of what he lost. He learned the hardest lesson of all. True power isn't about the money you flaunt, but the character you keep when no one is watching. Selene didn't just win the divorce, she won her life back. She proved that silence isn't weakness, it's just the pause before the conqueror speaks. What would you have done if you were Selene? Would you have warned him? Or would you have let him destroy himself exactly like she did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have a new saga coming next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket from his greedy family. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.